Welcome back again, Valley baseball fans. We've got to do it again. We've got to talk Indiana State baseball with Joe Healy from D1Baseball.com. They did it. Indiana State takes care of Wright State and Iowa. They go 3-0 in the Terre Haute Regional, 37-4 in their last 41, and Mitch Hannes had 45 wins on the season and counting. We bring in Joe now, and Joe, what can you say? They go 3-0. It was a little unconventional at Terre Haute, but they got it done. What did you see from the Sycamores?
Yeah, just really impressive to go 3-0 and win a couple of several really close games. I mean, none of those games were really blowouts or walkover wins. And there's something about first-time hosts or teams that haven't hosted in a while that sometimes they come in and play tight because there's a specific pressure with hosting, right? You've got, more fans than you ever really have for a regular season game packed in there. Some of them, are just kind of tuning into the team for the first time, and everybody's really jacked up for it. And so there is like a little bit of pressure. And you and I talked to Mitch Hannes before the MVC tournament, and that's kind of what he was alluding to with the MVC tournament and hosting that. So the regional, you can imagine, is on a whole nother level of that. So to come in and play well, play their game, go 3-0, really, really impressive, because a lot of teams in that spot would not have played nearly as well.
We talked about the pressure of playing at home, and they kind of saved their best for last. A couple of those games, it looked like, okay, the honeymoon's over with. They're going to have to try to battle back through the losers bracket, but it never came to pass. And part of it was Keegan Watson had a big weekend. Grant McGill had a big weekend. Adam Pottinger scored 6 runs and had 4 hits. And it's just seeming more and more like this team is greater than the sum of its parts. Would you agree?
I think that's totally right, because it's not just, we tend to fixate on like who are their big guys in the lineup, with every team, like, or who are their studs on the mound. And Indiana State has those, especially on the mound. But when you get to a regional, you have to get something from guys that haven't necessarily been the biggest names on your club. And I think back over the weekend to, Adam Pottinger defensively, right, making some key defensive plays, or, Grant McGill being the defensive catcher that he is to limit the running game. Yes, he throws runners out, but between Indiana State's pitchers holding runners and Grant McGill behind the plate, a lot of teams just don't run as much as they would otherwise. So I go back to those things. And obviously, McGill had big hits, the offensive piece was important too, but I think this is where being a complete team, as Indiana State is, kind of comes into play, because they had to win games in different ways over the weekend. And, going back to the original point too, just they took a punch from Wright State early, and that's what Wright State does. They typically go into these regionals and they punch the host team, right in the mouth, right at the very beginning. And some teams respond well and some teams don't. And Indiana State responded exactly the way you'd want them to. And I have to wonder if that serves them well moving into a super regional, where it didn't come easy in a regional. They went 3-0, but it was not an easy 3-0. They're battle tested. Certainly they're not afraid to play on the road. We know that much about them. So I'm kind of intrigued to see how much the wind is at their back as they head to Fort Worth.
It's interesting that they won and went 3-0 without playing, I thought, Sycamore baseball for 3 games. There were 2 games where they made a total of 5 errors, and you would never expect that from those guys. And if I told you their starting rotation would go 15 innings and allow 11 earnies, you'd tell me they went 1-2, right?
Yeah, I mean that is, yes. I mean that's the part that's weird about how they arrived there, is it wasn't exactly how you would have assumed, they would draw up going 3-0. But again, that's, I think, a credit to a team that just expects to win, and it just goes into games knowing like we're going to figure it out. Like we're just going to keep rowing the boat, to use a phrase, and just kind of, we'll get behind, we'll fight back. It's all totally fine. And I think that's one of the things that was eye-opening to people who've not watched this Indiana State club are, they know Jacek and Finlong, and they say, okay, those are their guys, but hey, maybe once we get past those guys, we can really do something. But I think what a lot of folks saw was that there's some real guys in this bullpen, and it's not just junk ballers. Like they've got some guys with real stuff. I mean, Gregerson comes in and is throwing that yacker of a curveball with a left-handed fastball that just has real ride on it. And I think it just, he's just one example, but it just opened eyes to like, oh my goodness, okay, they've got dudes in the bullpen too. This isn't just a let's wait out the starting pitchers and then feast on the relief arms kind of thing. And so the team almost seems like the Sycamores are kind of finding new things as the season goes on, which I think is a sign of a club that's playing its best baseball at the right time.
And to your point, I think that's probably proof positive of what that crowd did for them. You know, when times got tough, when things didn't look great, that crowd was crazy all weekend, and it was kind of carried over from the Missouri Valley Conference tournament as well.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, the atmosphere seemed incredible. It looked incredible on TV. It sounded incredible on TV. I can only imagine what it was like to be there. But that's where the crowd can be a positive influence, as opposed to something that kind of helps the team or puts the team in a position where they play tight. But yeah, it was precisely the type of atmosphere that you would have expected for a club that hadn't hosted, and a club that's excited, or a team that's fans that are excited to get behind a team that's playing this well. So, this weekend it's a different challenge being on the road, but I think the experience of having been in that regional, I think, proves that Indiana State belongs, probably proves to the team a little bit that, hey, they're human, right? So I would imagine there was even a little bit of doubt coming in of like, we've never done this. Do we belong on this stage? How is this going to go? And the fact that they were able to get through it that efficiently, I think probably proves something to themselves even.
So now this weekend, you've got a hot TCU team, especially offensively, against this workmanlike Indiana State team, which I think we both would agree, Joe, that if Indiana State pitches like it normally does or can, that's the great equalizer. How do you see this weekend going?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. It's if Indiana State pitches the ball in classic Indiana State style, they're going to be able to. That's their path to being competitive this weekend against TCU. The TCU offense is a juggernaut when it is swinging the bat well, and right now it's swinging the bat well. They put up a whole bunch of runs in the Big 12 tournament. I believe set a record for most runs scored in a single Big 12 tournament in history, and then obviously put it on Arkansas pretty good over the weekend in Fayetteville. But they've been inconsistent. If TCU had been that team all season long, TCU would have not only hosted, but probably been a top 8 seed. But they weren't that team all season long. They had some inconsistency. They had some periods of time when their bats went silent. I mean, they looked great early in the season too. So they've just kind of had this peaks and valleys things going on. And the flip side of it is that you can get their pitching. They are still, they're mixing and matching a lot on the mound. They're kind of the antithesis of Indiana State, where they don't necessarily, they don't have the certainty that Jasek and Finlong give Indiana State. They don't have that same thing on the mound. They're still feels very much like they're trying to figure out exactly who their guys are, who they want to throw in big games. I can tell you they'll see Cole Klecker, as one of the starters. Indiana State will certainly see him, but as far as who they see in what roles beyond that, I think is kind of up in the air. And, Kirk Saarloos is an accomplished, certainly accomplished college pitcher, pitched in the big leagues. He's been one of the best pitching coaches in the country as an assistant at TCU. And now, as a head coach, you kind of expect him to figure it out and him to put the pieces together. But that is where I think Indiana State can get TCU. Is I think there's an opportunity to put up some runs.
Indiana State and TCU in Fort Worth, the first super regional ever for the Trees. Thanks again for watching, everybody. A very special Indiana State edition of the MVC First Pitch.